Hello, and welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight we have returning guest Ryan Burns. But before I introduce him, check out Raised by Giants on Rokfin. It is a completely uncensored platform. Go over there, set up a free account, get all of my regular content that I post on here and all of the other creators' content as well, and sign up for Rokfin's premium content, which is far less than a YouTube premium account at only $10 a month. And you'll get my premium content when it gets released and all of the other creators' premium content as well. Check the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform, Rokfin. Also, check out C60 Purple Power. It is the most powerful antioxidant on the planet, helps with energy levels, skin problems, infections, eyesight, brain cognition, EMF radiation, and a lot more. It is a free radical sponge that gives your body the ability to heal itself. And if you use promo code GIANTS10 from the link in the description, you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. I highly recommend it. So without further ado, introducing tonight's returning guest, Ryan Patrick Burns. He began researching the Uintah Basin and the mysterious Skinwalker Ranch years ago, but when his passion for answers could no longer be quenched, he left his corporate job in Salt Lake City and moved to the desolate and remote basin to investigate the ranch full time. Ryan now owns property overlooking the ranch. He hosts the popular podcast Hero Paranormal and has written about his experiences investigating the Skinwalker. Hello, Ryan, my friend. Good to see you again. Thanks so much for coming back on. How are you doing?
Doing great. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been a little bit, and I'm really excited to speak with you and really jump into this and dive in and get some more details than last time. So to kind of start this out, what's happening at Space Wolf Research, my friend? What do you guys got going on there? I suppose the first thing that you can mention is, what is Space Wolf Research and what are you guys trying to accomplish there?
You bet. Spacewolfresearch.com. It's basically a base camp for research and investigation. Just a small private real estate company using a variety of different research methods to try to anticipate anomalies and kind of be prepared for them and be able to document them and collect the data. And it's been great. We've been using different AI software that is kind of interesting because it kind of helps build a database of when things happen. You have your more traditional stuff, like Farmer's Almanac type things that work really well. But there's also a little bit, it seems, of random number generator type phenomena that takes place. And honestly, this high strangeness seems to be right at home playing with random number generators as well. So nothing seems to be able to evade or trick the trickster, at least not as of yet. But yeah, having a great time out there. We've been messing with, I shouldn't say messing because it's very serious, but we've been basically poking the hornet's nest of high strangeness and also trying to keep things safe. We've been using, like I said, cutting edge technology, but then also using ancient technologies like stone Peruvian heads that were shipped up from Peru and placing those in different locations on the property and seeing how those tend to adjust or maneuver or basically correlate with the electromagnetic frequency spikes and radiation spikes that we're gathering. And there does seem to be a very real correlation between where you have these large stone heads that are very powerful according to Mesoamerican culture and where these EMF spikes and radiation spikes take place. So there seems to be some congruency to it all. It's really wild and I love doing it.
Is there any government funding for this program that you're running, or is it all done by private investors?
Nothing I can, as far as funding, I can't get into any of the funding just because it's much of it is covered under non-disclosure agreements and things of that nature. So I can't really get into funding.
Well, I was just asking because we know that the government had a hand in the funding of Bigelow Aerospace and, at the Skinwalker Ranch as well. And you're really close to the Skinwalker Ranch. So I was just curious, but I understand. So so the last time you were on, you kind of dropped a bomb about these underground bases or tunnels that are scattered throughout the Uintah Basin. So maybe explain and tell the audience a little bit of what you know about that, because I find that very interesting.
Yeah, great question, man, and actually super synchronistic. Actually, today and tomorrow, we are conducting ground penetrating radar tests up there, and have a few people helping with things, basically seeing if and how caverns or cavities connect. Also doing some magnetometer readings. And yeah, there does appear to be, from all viewpoints, a cavern system of some kind in the Uintah Basin. And it seems to encompass a large portion of what we call the dinosaur diamond. So that's an area, if you call the Uintah Basin, it's basically like a big bowl, right? So it acts almost like sort of a satellite dish in cosmic terms. And if you look at the whole thing, it's fairly large, like an 80 square mile radius, a large chunk of land. And everywhere from the east slope away to an area known as Thompson Springs, or as you're nearing Moab, really. So it's the bottom portion of the Ouray Native American reservation, which is extremely massive and has a variety of just wild canyons and some of the coolest stuff you've ever seen. And an area known as 9 Mile Canyon, which is more like 90 miles long. I found that out the hard way the first time I went down it. But yeah, that's actually all encompassed in this. And there does seem to be cavernous, veiny like structures or tunnels that go under the entirety of it. I don't know if this is just remnants from an ancient underwater aquifer from the past, or if there's more to it. There has been a lot of speculation that there may have been ancient species of possible humanoids that built this, according to some of the researchers on site, people that are researching places like Sardinia and other locations that have parallel petroglyphs depicting the same things, which is super odd because the Uintah Basin is obviously separated from these other locations by thousands of miles. So and major oceans. So how they have the exact same petroglyphs and they seem to be mimicking each other is a real head scratcher. But they do seem to be purporting the at least historic presence of giants or giant-like individuals. You got to be careful because you can really go down this rabbit hole and go hard into the paint as far as the giant thing. If you follow a lot of the research, they seem to have been quite Nordic in features, possibly having red hair, multiple rows of teeth, depending on some of the literature and petroglyphs and pictographs that you check out on the subject. But more importantly, they seem to love caverns, caves, tunnels, things of that nature. There's a massive cave system that starts between Vernal, Utah, and a town called Dutch John, which I used to be a fly fishing guide at. And it's deep in the Ashling National Forest, Little Brush Creek, and there's some other caves in the area that go forever. And when I say forever, I mean they have not found the ends of some of these caves. So it is possible and likely that there is a lost history to the area, and that if not built by ancient civilizations, there is a very good possibility that ancient civilizations may have used some of these tunnel networks to either transport things back and forth, hide from enemies, or ambush enemies. And it's super interesting. I find that just the scale, the massiveness of the Uintah Basin and locations like 9 Mile Canyon, which have literally, it has the longest and most extensive petroglyph system in the world. I mean, you cannot find anywhere on the planet that has more petroglyphs than this place. And they're not that hard to find. I mean, if you just look. So it's one of those things, if your mind is open and your eyes are open, there's a lost history in the area that a lot of people, including myself, are very interested in. And hopefully we can all kind of work together and accumulate data and find out more.
Has there been any giant skeletons found in the Uintah Basin? Because we know that there's some that's been found in Ohio and Pennsylvania and places like that, like the Serpent Mound and stuff. Has anyone discovered any giant remains, like giant skeletons that you know of?
It's very interesting because there's an intimate relationship between some of the private property owners and some of these locations that they've opened up for research. And I've heard a lot of, well, from very reliable sources, that they haven't opened the entirety of some of their properties up to public viewing. And some of these locations have what appear to be excavations nearby. So yes, I believe that there is the possibility that something like this will be found nearby in Brewer's Cave. If anybody wants to do a quick Google search, and other locations in Utah, there have been purported massive giant-like skeletons and bones, as well as artifacts found. So there is a history in the state of Utah for this type of thing. It's not just, smoke and mirrors and crazy ideas. There's actually some history for this. And as you know, I mean, even as far down as Nevada, the Lovelock Cave, I mean, a lot of this stuff has been very well documented. We have a giant-like skeleton that was found there. And what's more interesting is it was also somewhat mummified, and it was quite literally older than the mummies found in Egypt by a lot. So there was definitely people roaming this area. It's not, being Columbus Day, it's not one of those things where, Columbus found this place and there was nothing going on before then. There's a lost history that seems to be very, very lengthy. And it's very possible that more will be found over time. And you hear a lot of rumors of organizations that are somewhat clandestine, not always government related, but possibly with government ties coming into some of these archaeological dig sites and basically taking over, like cordoning them off. I heard a event in Arizona where this took place, and there was an archaeological dig with the university. They found Tibetan prayer flags literally in this Native American Hopi site. And those two things are not supposed to be at the same location at the same time, at least not according to our history that we're spoon-fed through our collegiate system. So they shut the place down. Nobody was exactly sure who took over, but it was taken over and the students were no longer welcome there and were made to sign NDAs so that they could not discuss what they had seen. So there is a real lost history, it appears. And I for one think that, even if a little bit of gold slips through the cracks, we might be able to find it.
So you say that you believe that these cave systems were maybe created by an ancient civilization, these tunnels. Is there any evidence of a dumb or a deep underground military base that could be operating in the Uintah Basin that you are aware of?
That is a really good question, man. And I like how you asked it, because there is a lot of evidence suggesting, again, a lot of these things were done either with government affiliated projects, or there's plausible deniability due to the fact that these private corporations, many of which are aerospace corporations, were involved in studies that were funded by taxpayer money and quite clandestine or black budget, or not something that civilians readily were aware of. And among those studies, there was one of the very best remote viewers on the planet, Joe McMoneagle, was involved in one of these studies there in the Uintah Basin, and he, for a fact, did a very accurate view of this hotspot. And in his opinion, near this epicenter of activity, there was telltale signs of what he could call an underground control center. Now, is that a deep underground military base? Unknown. Is it possibly a deep underground, possibly extraterrestrial base? That's unknown. He did sort of say that it was along the lines of something more ancient, but it's very difficult because, again, this was all covered in a project that was quite literally a black project. And this is a place that where he was remote viewing, all he got were target numbers. You know, he did not have any geographic or geological background on the location yet. In his drawings, and some of those are available actually in some recently published literature on the Uintah Basin and some of the stuff that's happened in the epicenter there. And in his drawings, he extremely accurately drew all of these buildings on location in the correct order. He drew rocky outcroppings, even trees and waterways and red rock ridges, you know, to a degree where you would swear that he was looking at literally a picture of the place when you overlay it with an actual picture of the place. So as random as remote viewing seems, I'm a huge believer. I have talked to other remote viewers who have been called in on projects to the Uintah Basin, and they've told me off the record that yes, they also sense that there is an underground control center, as they say, of activity of some sort, and whether that's human or something that is more of a mix or possibly interdimensional, it really is open for discussion. Nobody has any hard and fast proof.
Yeah, I believe in remote viewing as well, and apparently so does the government. You know, with all the remote viewing, declassified documents, Project Stargate, and stuff like that. And I personally believe that that's what they were trying to do, was create these psychics and remote viewers through their MK Ultra programs, their Monarch programs, and Montauk programs. That's what the whole basis for the project was to do, was to create these psychic and remote viewers for clandestine operations. But it's really interesting that we're talking about these deep underground military bases. Have you heard any like machinery noises coming from underground where there shouldn't be any machinery noises? Because I watched this documentary on the Travel Channel. Well, it's not really a documentary, but it's like a series on the Travel Channel called The Alaskan Triangle. And my friend Eric Hecker was in that show, and they went out. I don't know if you know about the Alaskan Triangle, but it's where all these people go missing. It's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle and the Great Lakes Triangle, where, you know, people seem to just kind of disappear. And he went out into the off the coast there in a little town. I can't remember the name of the town in Alaska, and with a device that was able to listen like underwater. And he got what sounded like a bunch of machinery noises, like heavy machinery on the device that he was using. And of course they didn't show that in the show, because the show's not actually interested in finding the truth. They just want to ask more and more questions. So I know that was a little bit long-winded, but is there a correlation between these heavy machinery noises that could possibly be heard in some kind of deep underground activity?
That is a great question and super relevant given some recent activity that has happened on a bordering property that Space Wolf Research sold to a good friend of mine. And he has dubbed the property Umbra Viventa Lucis, or like the Center for Starry Wisdom, taking a much more consciousness research approach to the entire ordeal. And he was camped out next to a pond on the property. And he messaged me and said, Brian, is there any machinery under this pond? And he pumps and he vacuums. Basically, I said, no, there's nothing of that sort, no irrigation machinery, nothing at all. And he was witnessing this pump making, well, this pump, it seemed like a pump. He was witnessing this pond making gurgling sounds as if it had a pump in it or some sort of machinery. And the water was being agitated. There seemed to be something either pushing water up into the pond or pulling water out of the pond at the bottom. Now it has a side entrance that goes into a little creek, but that would not be gurgling at the center of the pond as if there was a fountain or a pump or anything mechanical of that nature. But he asked me, is there something mechanical going on in this pond? And there absolutely is not. So that's a property that is super near and dear to my heart, and he's taking really good care of it. He's somebody I trust very much, or else I would not have sold it to him. And he's taking an approach a lot like mine, where we feel like we're stewards of, just caretakers really of the land and not owners. And we are trying to somewhat commune with the properties in ways that are not invasive. So we're trying to play by the property's rules. And I know that sounds very strange talking about land as if it is alive, but when you set foot on these locations, it very much seems like some of this property and some of these lands are very much alive, especially when the sun goes down and night falls. These locations seem to have an energy about them. They seem to be super welcoming at times. At other times, kind of give you the cold shoulder, and it's stuff that people can feel. And on various occasions, you'll be walking along and feel what literally feels like the ground shaking below your feet. Whether this is an electromagnetic frequency spike or if the ground is actually shaking is difficult, because oftentimes as researchers, investigators, and scientists in the area have attributed, I've been there with multiple groups before and had this happen, a sense of vertigo often comes over the people observing or witnessing this phenomenon. So it really makes you wonder if it's all in your head or if it's actually happening. Yes, it feels like the ground is shaking, but you also feel vertigo. So it's really, really bizarre, really bizarre. Yes, you hear underground murmurings, rumblings, and mechanical noises, but I thought this recent experience that this gentleman had at the pond was super relevant with your question, because it's not a big pond, it's a smaller pond, and yet he could very legitimately see what he believed was some kind of machinery making the water move and making sounds and making noises, when in fact, there's nothing in there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually had an experience like that at a paranormal location, like what you're talking about with the ground moving. Me and my friend was investigating this house. We stayed there for a week, and the entire house just vibrated, like it was shaking, dude. And I literally wanted to get out of the house because I didn't know what was going to happen. I was just kind of frozen in fear. But the entire house was shaking. It was like a paranormal earthquake is what they call them, but it wasn't in nature or whatever. But I thought that, the house was literally going to collapse. I was like, where's my nearest exit point? How do I get out of here as quick as possible? So I have experienced that. It's really nuts.
Yeah, there is. I think that's a really good name for it. I might steal that name from you, Paranormal Earthquake, because that's exactly what it feels like. And that's a really good describer of, what's taking place. So I might steal that from you if it's cool, Ryder. That's a good name for it.
Yeah, go ahead. 100%. We stayed there for a week, and it was like one of the last days that we were there, and the entire house was just shaking. It felt like it was going to fall apart, and we felt like it was kind of coming from the basement of the house. And we woke up in the middle of the night at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and just to the house shaking. I was like, holy crap. But again, it was like what you're explaining. You're like, okay, well, is this happening in my head? Is this, but we were both experiencing it, right? So I knew that it wasn't just me. I stood up, I had the camera in my hand, and I'm looking at him with my jaw like wide open while he's sitting on the bed. I'm like, bro, like, what is happening right now? Yeah, it was really intense.
That's so weird. And architecture is not immune from some of this movement. In fact, we have had to, more than a lot of the listeners, but we have had to put basically tent stakes around anything that is placed out there, whether it's buildings, structures, and architecture is not immune because these things seem to move a little bit. And it doesn't matter how big it is. You'll come back to an area and be like, wait, wasn't this just over there? Which sounds completely impossible. But yeah, we've put tent stakes around and been trying to keep an eye on that. And this house that you were in, was it like an older house, like a vintage home, or a newer home?
It was kind of the foundation of the home was really old. It went back to the late 1800s, but it was kind of modernized, right? So the basement was kind of the oldest part of the house, which is really weird too, because your space wolf research, and the name of the house was called the Wolf House.
Oh, how cool. I love it. I love it. Well, believers in the Tartaria conspiracy theory are convinced that a lot of this type of architecture that is older in nature, and some of it has very stable structural foundations, that they were built over particular areas or energy lines or grids, and that they would be prone to some of that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, we kind of thought that too. Maybe it was on some kind of ley line or something, but it wasn't so much, because I was a huge paranormal investigator. Back in the day, I've been to some of the most popular locations in the United States. And we thought maybe because it was all a psychological thing there, it wasn't so much you would see things or really hear things. Like the house would just play games with you, try and psychologically manipulate you, and kind of like, tricking you like a trickster, is basically really what it was. And we didn't really see too much there. It was just like the house had a dramatic effect on you psychologically, really weird.
It is weird. And it's kind of sticking with that Russian Tartaria type theme. A lot of the architecture in Russia, I mean, you see this stuff and it's mind blowing. And you see things like the Panama Pacific International Exposition in ancient times. I say ancient, I wasn't around, but it was San Francisco, 1915. And a lot of these structures that were supposedly built for these fairs seem to be so ornate and mind-boggling that a lot of people have claimed it's not possible to build something like that just for a World's Fair. This fictional, empirical, type architecture that would just baffle anybody, and then knock it down after the fair or not too long afterwards. And you see a lot of this in Russian architecture, and it brings to mind that Russia has always sort of been the enemy in so many of the history books, and it's kind of like the place everybody wants to get rid of. And I don't know if there might be, obviously there's a lot of political factors, but I always wonder if the place ever was taken over. Obviously it's so massive and has so many natural resources and such a massive army, and been at the game of war so long that it's super unlikely. But if anybody ever did take it over, and we may find this out in our lifetimes, what would happen to the architecture there? Because it's mind-boggling. I think there could be a lot to be learned just from looking at some of the architecture over in Russia.
I don't think that they could tear it down unless they completely nuked it, because I'm pretty sure in Russia there's buildings on top of buildings on top of buildings. Like they go down stories and stories deep, right? And they just built new structures on top of old structures, which then leads credence to some kind of mud flood activity that happened. Because there's literally pictures of whenever they would excavate some of these places that people didn't even realize that they were living on stories and stories of much older buildings. There's a church there, and there's like this entire complex of uh, area of buildings that goes down like 20 stories, and you can see how old the brick foundation was. You know what I mean? So it's there's a lot of stuff to that in the Tartaria and the World's Fairs. I mean, they definitely couldn't have built that in the time span that they said that they did, right? They said that they built up all those World's Fairs in like 2 years' time. You talk to any architecture expert nowadays, and they'll tell you that that would take years upon years to build that. I mean, it looked like ancient Rome and downtown Chicago in the late 1800s, right? You just can't do that in 2 years.
Yeah. And man, I was blown away on a recent trip to Philadelphia because I had no idea, kind of going along this mud flood theory. I got to see Franklin Court, which was the site of the brick home that Benjamin Franklin lived in. And apparently it's one of these situations where, Franklin moved into the home, which was already standing. He died there like in 1790. But when you're looking at the remnants of some of these buildings and these properties, they're down. They are down lower than street level, like significantly, like the courtyards and it does appear, you wonder, why is it so far down there? You're looking at some of the stuff and you're just wondering, like, that's a good 8 feet down. Why is the floor of that building a good 8 feet down? This was an already standing structure, apparently. And, it's just really strange, the details of the building and the way it's built. A lot of these buildings, as you say, appear to have been, built on top of each other. And in fact, you look around and you realize that there must have been a lot of other houses around this house, and there are a lot of buildings built on top of those. So it's super fascinating, where, an entire house could literally be under another house.
Yeah, it's really incredible, and I implore people to research that and look into it, because it's really, really interesting. And like, we built structures we built them the last, back in the day. So it only makes sense that if some sort of ancient civilization, maybe even a more highly advanced civilization, was here before and built their structures really, really well, and some kind of catastrophe or a mud flood or something came through, it wouldn't knock them down, right? It would just bury them. I mean, look how long the pyramids have been standing, really, really long time. It doesn't seem like they're ever going to be destroyed. They're like a forever lasting structure, right? So if they had just a little bit of the ingenuity left over from ancient times to build some of these structures, then the structure would inevitably last. And then we found that, and then we just build on top of it. A lot shittier, might I say, because nothing is built to last anymore in our reality. You know what I mean? Houses are built 1 year and buildings are built 1 year, and then they're tore down the next year, it seems like. I think that we really do need to get back to building things that last now.
That's a big deal. I agree, man, that the whole idea of like cornerstone building and like the ceremony that was typically involved of creating these buildings, it was like a whole other situation taking place compared to like modern building techniques, where it's just so fast and cheesy and cheap. Like you said, it's not made to last hundreds of years. It's made to last decades, if that. It's a totally different, there used to just be entire rituals and ceremonies involved with placing the cornerstone and then building the property, and engravings commemorating the time when particular buildings were built. You don't see any of that anymore. It's just glue and wood shavings put together, slapped up as quickly as possible, and sold for the highest price. And it's just kind of sad, like a lot of the brick masons and a lot of the Masonic, for lack of a better word, important cultural components of building structures are gone.
Yeah, it really seems like we've descended on that trail, right? Because we've been using the same stuff for decades, Ryan. We've been using the same exact things, just modified just a little bit to make it seem like it's different, so that we, buy it. We're still using the exact same things, that we're still using the same refrigerators, same microwave, same, washer and dryer. None of it has advanced. The only thing that's advanced has been our technology, right? And we know that our technology isn't good for us. It's actually, putting off very harmful electromagnetic frequencies that is not conducive to the human body, right? So that's the only thing that they've seemed to be interested in evolving is our technology, right? They don't really care about our way of life and making our way of life easier and better, because they keep producing the same thing over and over again. We're still using trains, we're still using planes, gas powered vehicles. I mean, and there has been a little innovation on that front. We have electric vehicles, but that's not any better, right? There's been something that's stunning our way of life in the way that we do things, like in the way that technology has developed and advanced. If our way of life had advanced along with the technology, I think that we would be living in a utopia right now.
It does seem as if there, at least what you were mentioning, a lot of these technologies are just hand-me-down breadcrumbs from the industrial military complex. I mean, you look at the military technology trends and the artificial intelligence, the advanced defense equipment, the robotics, the autonomy, and it is quite literally everything that we are super stoked about, even our cell phones, is to a degree just kind of hand-me-down breadcrumbs to stuff that is super advanced military technologies. And it makes you wonder. I mean, when you have these nuclear battleships that can run indefinitely forever, and we have to stop at the gas pump and weekly if we can afford it. So it's hard to forecast where technology would be if it was super abundant and like an open system. I don't know, man. It's pretty wild that we're still flying, in jets that people were flying in the 40s. Nothing's changed, like you said. Very little.
Yeah, we know that the military has, highly advanced technology. We know that the government has highly advanced technology. I mean, there's patents out for the TR-3B, and you're totally right in saying that, we have these nuclear powered, naval fleets, and what are they running on? They have to be running on some kind of, there's no way that it's just nuclear power. It has to be some sort of almost free energy device to keep it powered forever, right? And they're not saying that, they're telling you that it's nuclear powered, but really they've been using something completely different. That's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of different energy. And I mean, you do need the military to make these advancements. Obviously, we probably wouldn't have the internet or our cell phones or, even satellite TV if it wasn't for their advancements. And the fact that they protect us is also pretty important. So I get the trade secrets, but some of the things really make you wonder. At least they make me wonder. When we purportedly were able to get to the moon in 1969, haven't gone back yet, we're shooting the dart into space and hitting meteors at 7 million miles away. This is mind-blowing technology, in my opinion. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to pretend that I can even wrap my head around 7 million miles away and shooting a spacecraft that costs $300 million to engage it or to knock it off course just a little bit. And sure, is it to save humanity? That is the story. However, when you do the math, it just seems, in my humble opinion, mind-boggling math. And, you know, is it possible? If these things are possible, what else is possible?
Absolutely. And then, looking at Bigelow Aerospace and the technologies that they might be developing, because I had Tom Carey on my show, and he's a really researched Area 51, not Area 51, but the Roswell incident. He's researched that. He's written like 12 books on the Roswell incident. And apparently he or someone he knew submitted a FOIA request to figure out where the remnants of the crash landing in Roswell in 1947 is at, right? And apparently he got the FOIA request back, and it stated that it was at Bigelow Aerospace in California. So do you know anything about that?
I know that leads into the basically the Wilson document leak. And Tom Carey, I mean, he had a secret crypto clearance, so his pay grade is much higher than mine. But I know that kind of starts infringing a little bit on the Wilson document leak, which you have a highly, highly praised and regarded scientist talking to a military gentleman in a parking lot, literally. And, we now have FOIA requests of people that are trying to basically say that this stuff is not authentic. And it's funny how they I won't mention names, but people who are saying that a lot of this stuff isn't authentic hold true to the fact that anything FOIA coming down the pipeline would tell them anything. The belief that anything under the Freedom of Information Act would tell you anything, in my mind, seems preposterous, because that is like asking Big Brother to tell you where he hid his Playboy magazine. He's not going to do it. He might show you where he hid the My Little Pony magazines or something like that. But the bottom line is that it's a good theory and it's a great program. I think FOIA is a great system and all of that. Do I believe that we are getting actual redacted, solid information in every case? Probably not. And there's a reason a lot of it is redacted. And whether the stamp is on the left of the page or the top right of the page, whether it's in the correct format, a lot of people have kind of deemed themselves FOIA experts, which is breadcrumb experts. In my opinion, it's not any valid research, because as I've noticed, when it comes to military and military documents, not to mention administrative secretary work, which is usually what you end up signing, these things can come in any array, shape, or size that works. And a lot of times the plausible deniability that is incorporated in the paperwork can come from those very items that are being used to make them disingenuous or claim that they're not authentic. So I find it very strange. I've seen a lot of certificates of authenticity, whether it be on NASA documents. I've seen a lot of the paperwork that has come from regional directors of aerospace corporations, and this stuff, from one season to the next, you can get different watermarks, you can get different stamps, different ways that these contracts are written up, because they're written up for different purposes. And at the end of the day, all that matters is if you signed them, whether it holds weight or not, and what they do with the documents. So I think the Wilson document leak is super, super engaging, because there is it's very obvious. There is the belief that we have reverse engineered craft and we have original craft, which may have been found in again, archaeological digs, and that we have placed them in places with plausible deniability, which are in fact privately held aerospace corporations or things of that nature. Because if you keep these in a place like Area 51, then they have to give you a FOIA. But if you keep this in someone that you know's warehouse that happens to own a aerospace corporation, then you don't have to include anything. And that is kind of the plausible deniability that has made this country able to get away with so much in their technological advancements. It's much like the day after Roswell. You know, if you give it to a LLC or a corporation which just happens to have 20 or 30 sub LLCs under its umbrella of various names, all dealing with different scientific endeavors, there is no way you will ever retrace the steps or find out exactly where it came from, what's being done with it, where it's being housed. And it's done like that on purpose. So it seems to me that it's a really good plan. They're doing it really well. And to use that as a way of debunking it, to say, oh, well, we can't show the chain of command from here to here, so Luis Elizondo never worked for the government. It's like, no, that's the most ridiculous, in my opinion, way of unscrambling the egg, because you still have egg all over the place, and it had to come from somewhere. Just because it's a tricky subject matter, and people who are doing it are literally master magicians of their craft. It's much like I was just blown away this morning getting an email about someone who verified yet again the existence of what we know of as the aviary, which has been debunked 10 times from Sunday. And, you know, leave it to ufology to try to debunk these things that are at the highest levels of government. And then I think to myself, well, if I was at the highest levels of government, wouldn't I want that debunked? Of course I would. I would want everybody to think it was completely fake, because that's the end of the story and you can go on business as usual. But yeah, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. I don't claim to know any of them, but yeah, it makes me wonder, man. Makes me wonder.
Well, it's like that with any of the supposed classified documents that has been released, especially the MJ12 document, you know, them coming out and saying that, you know, that it's fake and it's nonsense, but the original version was real. You know, it's to create confusion and muddy the waters and get people confused on what's truth and what's not truth. And then if you release a completely fake document, like one that's just completely made up, it also gives you the ability to blanket any of the real ones with that made up fake document too, right? So if you released a completely, you know, made up fake document, then you can be like, oh, well, you know, this gives us plausible deniability that all these other real documents are also fake, right? It's a trick that they've been doing forever. Two lies and two truths and a lie, right?
It's a genius. It's genius. You know, I remember seeing, and I'm sure you've seen it, video footage of what was claimed to be, it was very blurry. It was video footage of what was claimed to be Bill Gates, a young Bill Gates, pitching this nanoparticulate technology that they called the FunVax, which was basically for fundamental extremists in the Middle East. And this obviously very intelligent, bright young man is in front of these generals, and he's pitching the idea of dropping chemtrails of this nanoparticulate over these epicenters of fundamental extremism in the Middle East, and explaining how it will quite literally disconnect them from their God and make them less dangerous. And that should be the scary thing, right? Well, as time passed, it took a few years, you get more clear video of the same conversation and the same gentleman pitching this to these government types in an obviously secure facility. And what was obviously noted is, hey, that's not Bill Gates, so this is obviously all BS. And it was thrown out, you know, throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's the end of that. And people aren't looking at, like what you said, they're not looking at the reality of what may be taking place here. And that's the kind of deniability you need, because to be honest, sure, we have enemies. Sure, we want to neuter them from a terroristic standpoint where they're not hurting us. But at the same time, when you look at the fundamental technology that's being used, that has extremely long-based mind control, trauma type stuff written all over it in the long term. These are, obviously enemies that prey a lot of the day. And to be able to manufacture something that disconnects them from their higher power at a very readily documentable rate is frightening to me. So just because it's not Bill Gates in a blurry video showing these generals how to do it doesn't mean that we should negate the entire video leak. And I think the same is true of the Wilson documents, or as you said, the things Carrie mentioned about Roswell, the things that the book Day After Roswell talks about. You have a lot of people who are giving a lot of information about a lot of things. And at the end of the day, if you are judging them on one little tiny part of the pie, you're going to miss the big picture. You're going to miss the dessert.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. That's why I try and bring a variety of people on my show, to talk about what they know, because you get a little piece of the puzzle and then you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and then it starts to, kind of make sense and you start to get the big picture of everything that's going on. Right. But they do seem to do that. They seem to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think that that's on purpose, right? They definitely do that on purpose so that they don't have to take responsibility for anything that they do, right? They can just brush it off onto the next person or the next thing. It's always someone else's fault, right, Ryan? It's always another country's fault, another group's fault, another individual's fault. They're never going to take responsibility for anything that they've done. And really, see, it used to be that, it's kind of flipped now, but it used to be like people outside of ourselves, like from other countries, were the enemy, right? They made that very clear with 9/11, right? They're like, okay, it's these jihads over here in this other country that's the problem, right? And then they flipped that on us, and then they made us the problem, right? And now they're trying to flip it back and then make another country the problem again. So it's the same playbook, just spun in a different way with a different enemy.
And I think it's important to mention also that the fact that they share anything, with these FOIA, for example, or with these grainy videos that are leaked, or the Wilson document leak, there's a lot of ritual, as we mentioned, with the building of ancient architecture. There's a lot of ritual involved in information. And those who are involved in many of the mystery school religions or mystery school fraternities, etc., know about the ritual. They don't want the karma coming back on them. And as long as you disclose the information, it is on the observer to decide which way the karma goes. Because once you disclose, hey, I'm going to do this, whether you believe me or not is entirely up to you. Or, hey, I did that, whether you believe me or not is entirely up to you. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, because if the disclosure is there, whether or not people decide to believe it is entirely up to them. It's a very, it's a magic trick of the highest proportions that the media, and I'm a public relations major that graduated in mass communications, and I remember hearing about the hypodermic needle theory, which is quite literally, can we tell the public what to think? And the answer is yes. That's why it's called the hypodermic needle theory. You can literally put whatever you want in the injector, inject it into the mass media, and create the effect that you want. And it's brutally honest. It's true. But if people depend on you for their information, you can feed them whatever information you put in that needle that goes into their television.
Absolutely. It's crazy. It's nuts how brainwashed and controlled the mass population is. I have one last question for you, and I'm going to let you go. And
Yeah, man.
you can you don't have to explain anymore. All right. You can just say yes or no. Right. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay. Have you witnessed personally, Ryan, any highly advanced governmental technology, whether reverse engineered or not reverse engineered, personally on your own?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I really just wanted to confirm that there. Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate you so much for coming back on my show. I really enjoyed the conversation. Hope you enjoyed it too. Let people know where they can find you online or find your podcast.
For sure. The podcast is at heroparanormal.com. You can go on YouTube, just search under Hero Paranormal, or Patreon. It's under Hero Paranormal, as well as Spotify and I believe Apple Podcasts even. And the Small Science Project, or Base Camp in the Uintah Basin, is spacewolfresearch.com is the website. You can also find that on social media such as Facebook and TikTok, etc. We'll drop little stuff that happens that is interesting. And yeah, man, thanks so much for having me. I love talking to you. And I don't know if it's of any note, but what I witnessed was actually before I ever really got engaged in this topic. So there is amazing technology out there, and some of it is absolutely mind-blowing.
Was it a anti-gravity technology or some kind of different technology?
It is along the lines of the, I would say along the lines of the X-37B or the TR-3B technology realm, without getting super on point. That in that ballpark, in that.
So like a triangle craft? Yeah. Did it have like the three lights on it? Did you see, was it lights, or did you see like a physical craft?
Very much anti-gravity is probably where I should leave it. Anti-gravity characteristics.
Thanks, Ryan, my friend. I really appreciate you. The links to all of Ryan's information will be in the description of this video. For everyone else, thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel out in the YouTube algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. Link to my channel on Rokfin is in the description. Sign up over there. Hit the follow button for my premium content. And you can catch this episode and any of my other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and download them individually to your device for free on Spreaker.com. And remember, we're not only in a spiritual war, but a war on humanity. Stay aware, stay alert, keep loving your heart for everyone. Stay safe out there. And if you can see through the illusion, you are the solution. See you guys next time.